Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hello, and welcome to this webinar session. My name is Alex, and I'm happy to have you here. Please let me know in the chat by posting something like exclamation mark, at symbol, or any number that I am audible and my screen is visible. Good afternoon, Stephen. Hey, Chris, thank you. Cool. Awesome. So let's start this one. So today we are going to talk about the Sunstone, the graphical user interface. We are going to cover some settings. We are going to talk about virtual networks. We are going to cover marketplace and apps, VM templates, and virtual machines. So we have pretty packed. So I'll try to make it as fun as possible. Now, let us talk about what is the Sunstone, right? If you go to the documentation, or if you're going to read through some articles, then you will find the terminology or term called Sunstone. So, what Sunstone actually is? It's a graphical user interface, right? It's a web-based graphical user interface. If it's not proxied, then by default, it's going to listen on a port 2616 TCP, and has the built-in time-based one-time based password codes MFA. So what's the good about it? That is the same entry point for both administrators and users. The only difference is that the view is going to differ, right? The way what is visible, what's accessible by the user, that's based on the permission and user type, but that is the same entry point. Now, currently, we are running two Sunstones. There is the old Sunstone, and then there is the new Sunstone. So the old one, if you installed from with Mini One, then in Mini One, that is going to be port 80. So that's where you find the old Sunstone, if you still would like to look how it looks. And if you really would like to enjoy the new one, then 2616 is the port to enter. Now, this how it is going to look. Now, that is the login page, and that's what where you are going to enter your credentials. Now, it's very important to understand that I am going to use one admin. So one admin is the top tier administrator. Basically, I will have access to everything. Depends on your permissions, your mileage might vary, and you may see a little bit different picture. But in this scenario, we are assuming that you have the Mini One installation and that Mini One uses the one admin user. Now I need to log in using the predefined password. And as soon as you've logged in, you are going to see the dashboard. Now, this dashboard has some shortcuts like VMs, VM templates, images, and virtual networks. That is for like quicker and easier navigation, but the left hand panel is going to have literally everything. Now, again, that is really dependent on your permissions and the user type. Because if we talk about the user, every user has views. Now, if you'd like to look at them, these are the views, right? So the purpose of a view is to narrow down the amount of things that you can see on the screen. Now, if we talk about the difference between the user and the admin view, that's quite important, right? Because why should you have access to a place where you don't have access? So it's going to be visible to you that there is such tab, but as soon as you click it, you're going to get nothing there, or even some minor error that you don't have permissions. So in order to clean this up and make sure you're not going to see the things that you don't have access, we have these different views. Now, I'm again one admin. It's the top tier administrator, so this user has access to literally everything. That's why everything is visible. Now I can open and go through. But as soon as I'm going to switch to something like user, you can see on the left that it was already narrowed down to just a handful of options, right? So again, that is the purpose of a view, and by default, um, your users are going to have either cloud or um, or user view. So their view is going to be different from the one that you have, which is the admin. But please note that this is more like a soft limiter. So it's not going to prevent you from accessing certain places of OpenNebula if you are going to use command line. So, for example, I can limit myself or any other admin. So I can set the user view to that admin. So when you log in, you're going to see on the user view, which means you don't have the global settings, you don't have the host configuration, and your networks and storage and templates is pretty much limited. But as soon as you switch to the command line, that's it. You have the full access because the views are only limiting the front end, but not your actual permissions, right? So permissions are important still. You still need to balance these permissions in the right way. So another thing that you can access here is the settings menu, which allows you to select schema, which allows you to select English or any other language. Then you can have the views, which is going to be your default view, and also the default endpoint. So if you have multi-zone deployment, then you can select the different deployment. Now, what is very important, and if you're running Mini1, it is going to be the SSH public key is already there, so it's enrolled. But if you installed from packages or if you've created a new user, then the secure shell public key will be missing. Now, secure shell public key is quite an important thing. So I would suggest all the users to enroll their secure shell public key because by default, that is the public key that's going to be placed in the authorized keys on the virtual machines that you're going to deploy. So if you would like to access your virtual machines using the secure shell from your host, from your host, or even from like the OpenNebula, if you have a user there, then you will need to enroll your secure shell public key. So that would be the place to do that. Right. So that is the important bit of these settings. Plus, you can register your authentication app like Google Authenticator, Microsoft, Bitwarden, LastPass, whatever you name it. As soon as it can generate the time-based PIN codes, it is good to go. Also, you can label some resources. So that is where to place these labels and then later use in the templates or under the virtual machines or images. So that would be about the settings, and that is about the view itself. Now, the view is fine, of course, going here and there, but well, we would like to actually deploy something. And to deploy something, you would like to have a network, right? Of course, you can deploy your virtual machines without any network. And that's fine, but most of the time you would like them to be connected. So for that purpose, you would like to configure the virtual networks. Now, OpenNebula supports a multitude of standards. So we support the bridge and bridge with security groups. We support the Open vSwitch and Open vSwitch with VXLANs, the VXLANs themselves, and we are supporting VLANs. So .1Q standard is also supported. Now, the thing about security groups, so what this actually is. Now, security group is a tool that can limit traffic or filter traffic to reach certain virtual machines or certain destinations. So instead of controlling this traffic using the operating system of your virtual machine, so the firewall of your virtual machine, you can control it using the OpenNebula. Now, it's important to know that Open vSwitch with VXLAN and Simple Bridge is not supporting security groups. So security groups are supported by the bridge with security groups. So there is a dedicated type of a network, VXLAN or .1Q. Now, if we go right here and you've installed your OpenNebula using Mini One, then you are going to find the virtual network with FW. So FW stands for firewall. So that is the bridge with security groups. If that would be just a simple bridge without security group support, then you are going to get the label bridge. So again, these labels are important. And you can create your own networks. So again, this is the part where you need to kind of either understand how your networking works in the infrastructure, or alternatively, you have the networking team that can consult you on how your virtual infrastructure, how your networking infrastructure is configured. So you can configure different things here. So again, choose the type of the virtual interface. Then would you like to use this only as the private host networking, or you would like to bound it to some specific physical device? Then the bridge name, because it's going to create a bridge. Would you like it to have some certain name, specific name that you wish, or you just would like OpenNebula to create the one it can, I would say, generate it automatically instead of you picking a specific name. So all that is fine-tunable here. Obviously, it requires some kind of a name, and it's important as well to assign it to a specific cluster. Now, clustering is not a scope of this webinar, but just in general, you may group your resources in the specific clusters, aka groups, and then manage them in the easier way. So every resource is supposed to be a member of at least some kind of a cluster. So you should assign a cluster here. By default, everything goes into the default cluster. Yeah. So again, if I'm going to bind it to a specific device, then I need to set the name of that physical device. Or I can just go with use only private host networking and not figure it out. Okay, so you've configured some basic networking settings for your upcoming virtual network. The next step is to configure advanced options. And by advanced options, I mean the address range, some security if you are using the security groups, and if it's a bridge with security group or .1Q or VXLAN, then this one matters. Otherwise, it doesn't matter that much because the security groups are not supported. Then quality of service, and context. So with addresses range, you can define the IP addresses the way you wish, and the size of the network. So let's do simple this one, and let's add 10, um, 10 IP addresses from this network. So there are two things, right? So you can set the the uh, type of the address range. So it might be IPv4, IPv4 6, IPv6, right? So it might be IPv4 with no slack, or just simple Ethernet. So if you go just simple Ethernet, then it's only going to have the MAC addresses, right? If you go with IPv4 or IPv6, then you can have an option to add the IP address and MAC address. So the MAC addresses are going to be generated automatically unless you would like it to have a specific MAC address pattern, and then you can point it out here as well. So the context tab is the context tab is where you are going to set other additional important part of your network. For example, the gateway, the DNS, right, the network mask, and the network address. If you are not going to set anything here, then it's going to take things by default. So, for example, the network will be /24, right, and that kind of stuff. So the gateway is going to be .1, and the DNS is going to be 1111. So again, that is heavily dependent on how your network is going to be set up. So in your case may be different, but if let's say you are following the this with me, then these values are all right to set. Now, I'm not going to use the VNet 2. I'm going to proceed with this VNet to my virtual machine. So there is one thing I need to edit, and that's for the security reasons. So if, again, you've started your one in AWS or in Scaleway, or even sometimes on-prem if you have an advanced firewall, then you may need to change the important bit, and that important bit is DNS, right? So because in this network I cannot have the DNS, so the request from this DNS server is going to get blocked, so I cannot forward these requests. That's why I'm going to query 1111 straight from my virtual machines instead of hosting my own DNS server. Now, we have our networks, and there are a few things more to know about the network. Now, what you can do with networks, you can create a reservation. Reservation is very interesting thing, right? So let's say we have John and Jane, and John had asked me to, hey, I would like to use this network. So I have a few options how I can provide some address space to John, and I can just say, okay, you can use um, this network, and say, okay, others can use and manage, right? So by this, I'm kind of giving the permission to all other users to take this network and use it, which might not be the best option here because that's the big network and John only asked for 10 or 15 IP addresses. So John does not need more. And I also don't want to give the access to the whole network because, well, then John can, if I'm not going to configure any restrictions or any quotas, then John can easily consume the whole network space, and that is not going to be all right. So for the purpose of that, we have a very good function called reservations. So what I can do, I can reserve an X number of addresses, for example, 15 for John, from this range, and that's going to have a name, John's range. And I can either explicitly set the first address, or I can just leave it blank, and then it's going to take the first available one. So what this is going to make, this is going to create the reservation, and I can share it with John, so with users. I can assign the ownership to John, or I can share with others, so which means with other users of OpenNebula. So now John can consume the whole address space of that reservation without over consuming and without me granting any access to that initial network. So another cool thing is that in this case, John's range is going to inherit all the settings of the parent, right, of the parent network, which in this case is the VNet. And it means that I don't need to go through that configuration once again. So this is a very nifty feature. Another way to do that, I can actually create network templates. So, and that goes a little bit beyond a single network. So I can create a network template with some specific patterns. So I can define what the type of the network, I can bound it to a physical device, I can configure the gateway, DNS, and so on and so forth. And that is going to be the template, right? Obviously, I need to set something here. So, and then I can grant users an ability to create new networks from this template, which means that every user is going to be an owner of their network. So I don't need to manually reserve anything from any chunk of, of a network that I have, which again gives much more flexibility, but then also gives a little bit of responsibility on the user side. So either way works. And again, it depends on your setup. If you are serving to the customers and you're, let's say, the MSP, then most likely network templates is something that you would like to use. If you are working in a, the medium or SMB, small to medium business company, and basically you're serving your own internal users, your internal customers, then might be the simple reservation is fine. So again, my general advice always is not to overconfigure. So keep it stupid simple, right? So that is the best advice that we can have. So the simpler it is, the better it is going to work, and the less confusion you may have if you going into the troubleshooting route. Now, the virtual network, the initial one where we have the reservations, if you go to the leases, you can see that there is a bunch of IP addresses that are reserved. So no virtual machine is going to get this IP address or this MAC address because that one is reserved. Additionally, what you can do, if you know that there is a necessity to reserve some specific IP address and make sure it's not either reserved using the reservation or it is not used or consumed by any virtual machine, then you can hold the IP, for example, like .22 in this case, and is currently being held. So no VM or no reservation can consume that. And to showcase that, let me create a new reservation. And this time that would be James range. So Jane had asked us for 20 IP addresses, and we've just created a reservation. So we just reserved. And if we go to leases, you can see that it was kept. Now, the another thing is that because we cannot dedicate 20 IP addresses from the .17, right? So we are starting from the next, so from 2023. So in order not to split it into smaller chunks, right? So that's why we still have a short gap right now, like 5 IP addresses in between. But yeah, Jane is satisfied because she has 20 IP addresses to work with. So these reservations are very, very important and very good. And also, if you try to delete this one, you are not going to be able to do that. And the reason is because you have leases in that network. And by leases, that means virtual machines may have a lease, or any other network reservation is also considered as the lease. So in order to delete this network, if I will need to, then I need to go and firstly remove the reservations, which again, in case, for example, with the virtual network templates, is not going to be the case because, well, they are not dependent on any other virtual network. So you can easily go and delete them. Just keep that in mind. Right. So virtual network is fine, right? We need to configure that one, and we are happy with this virtual network, but we need to have the virtual machine in order to run it. Now, where we can get this virtual machine? Yes, we can deploy the virtual machine from so-called virtual machine templates. Now, where to get the virtual machine templates, and what is the part of the virtual machine template? So the part of the virtual machine template is going to be image. So because image is the snapshot of a disk, and it might be a bootable disk, it might be just a disk with files, it might be even an empty disk, but that is the snapshot of a disk. But then you are going to use virtual machine templates that are going to define the resources that will be available to the deployed virtual machine, network information, and so on and so forth. So all that can be downloaded from the marketplace. So we can say that marketplace is the source of pre-built images. So marketplaces can be public or private. We have a public marketplace with ready-to-use images, so you can download and use them. They're fine-tuned to work in the OpenNebula environment. And we have much more than just simple operating systems. We have a lot of various services there that are running some specific applications. So, for example, WordPress, Mini.io, we have Ray appliance, we have Kubernetes appliance, and so on and so forth. So that is the marketplace. But you also can host your own marketplace. It's either HTTP web server based or S3 compatible storage based. So you can host your own internal marketplace and let your users to download the appliances or images from that marketplace. Where to get them? So under the storage, you have marketplaces. That's where you can see the current active marketplaces and add a new one. And if you navigate to apps, you are going to get your the list of images that you can download. So for example, let's download Ubuntu 24. So you can download it or export it to your disk, or you can just download it or export it to the OpenNebula. So import into the data store. Now, what is very important is that, again, don't forget that we have virtual machine templates. We have the images. Now, image is the base for your virtual machine. but you're going to deploy your virtual machine from the VM template. So it's a good idea to actually download both the VM template and the image. And that's why you have this switch here to export associated VM templates or images. Because again, the image or the service might be a bit more than one single image and one single VM template. It may have more things, it may have some additional disks, or if in case that's a service, it's going to have multiple VM templates with multiple images. So yeah, again, I say this is the good button to be switched on. And then you can set the custom name for your image and custom name for the VM template, or proceed with the defaults, which again is totally fine. Just make sure you don't have same named images and same named VM templates on the data store already. So you would like it to be unique. Now you will need to import that on a specific data store. So we have 3 types of data store, and by default, these data stores are all local. You may have a network attached data store, so you may configure them afterwards. But if you installed from the Mini1 deployment, so that's from that script, then you are going to have the local data store. Now, what types of the data stores we have? We have image data store, we have system data store, and we have files data store. So files data store is the data store where you can keep your plain text files and then make them accessible from the virtual machine. Then system data store is going to store the images of the currently running VMs. And then the image data store is going to store the images of the virtual machines. So when you import an image into the OpenNebula, you are importing that into the image data store. You can see this, so image ID1 and VM template ID1, and it's green, which means that the import initiated successfully, and now we just need to wait. Now, the thing about VM templates, if you click to VM templates, you are going to find it straight away. If you go to images, then it might still be locked. Now, the thing is that the VM template is basically a bunch of text, right? So it's like the text-based thing, and it's very fast to download. While the image is the actual snapshot of your disk, so it may take time to download that, and it depends on the speed of your network connection, obviously. So it might be blazing fast or it might be quite slow. Plus, keep in mind that the size of the image can be big. So again, it may impact how fast you are going to get this image onto your data store. Again, with this one, it's pretty much fast. So as you can see, we already have this one there. So the image is there. And in this case, image is the bootable operating system, which is totally fine. But again, I can add more. I can add empty images, so the empty disks, and also assign them to the virtual machine template. But if you'd like to adjust your virtual machine template, because virtual machines basically is a set of parameters for your upcoming machine. So that's where you are going to set your virtual network cards or adjust the images. For example, my image currently is 4 gigs, which may be okay for the POC, but it's not enough for something to be actually deployed there. I mean, if you like some serious app, it may also consume like 4 to 5 gigs. So if you'd like to extend your partition or do any other adjustments, like for example, adding some contextualization to perform some basic tasks, or to, let's say, run a specific script when you deploy. So you will need, so that is going to be the VM template. So you need to edit that virtual machine template. Now, whatever you set there, some of the parameters may be adjustable by your user when you are going to deploy that virtual machine. Now, again, it's something to be aware of. It can be restricted, so you actually can go there and restrict some specific things, like let's say memory or CPU or virtual network from being edited by the user. But by default, some of the parameters are allowed to be edited by the user during the deployment. Right. And we also have such thing as the multi-VM deployment services. So services, these are also going to rely on the virtual machine templates, right? So can the virtual machine template in the scope of OpenNebula is quite crucial thing to be aware of. Now your virtual machine templates are here, and easily go select one and click update button, and you have them right here. So what you need to set is KVM as the hypervisor, and then you can adjust the memory of that virtual machine. So for example, 2048, the unit memory, so it's in megs, but you can go with gigs. You can adjust the physical CPU allocation as well as the virtual CPU. Then you can set the ownership, basically who is going to own that VM once it's going to be deployed. So I don't have any users here, so I cannot assign it to any other user. But for example, if I would have Jane or Jack or James, I could set Jack, James, or Jane as the owner of that VM. Basically, create a virtual machine on behalf of that user. And also, if you are planning to charge your users with for a specific resource consumption or allocation, then you can set the price of the memory, the price of the CPU, and the price of the disk. And then in the end, go to the profile and calculate the accounting and check out how much this user owes you. So, but in order to have this one, you need to set the costs upfront. Now, then you can, under the storage tab, what you can do, you can increase the disk space. So it's 4 gigs right now, or even select a new image if you'd like to. But let's say I would like 4 gigs is not enough for this template, so I would like it to be more. So I go next, and for example, adding a yet another 0. What else I can do? I can change the bus, so from virt.io to SCSI SATA, parallel ATA, or whatever I wish, and also set the target device, for example, to be dev SDB or dev SDA. So this is also possible. It's up to you to change that. For example, for the bus, I would stay on the virt.io for the better performance. Now, networking, again, that's where I can attach one network card or multiple network cards. And I can have 2 options here. I can rely on the automatic selection of the virtual network. So that's basically where I can write some kind of a pattern and then based on that pattern, the virtual network card is going to be assigned. So for example, it may take into the consideration the type of a network. So let's say only use VXLAN type of networks and then pick the one that is less occupied. So all that can be configured there. Or I can just go and manually select the virtual network where I would like this, where I would like my upcoming VM to be. Now I can configure the CPU stuff. I can adjust the PCI devices. So if I would like to pass through something like a GPU, then that can be done under the PCI devices. And then the cool thing is the context. So for that, I'm going back to a different template. Just bear with me, because I also would like you to adjust the Alpine Linux instead of the Ubuntu, just because the footprint of that one is much lower and it's going to be deployed much faster. So KVM, go to the context. Now, the cool thing about the context is that you can have different things um, right here. So first of all is the secure shell public key, right? So what to add. So you can add the secure public key, secure shell public key to be added to authorized keys of your virtual machine. You can set a start script. So what you would like to do. For example, I would like to install the web server, and then I would like to start this web server. Now, the thing is that if you are going to use shell, then you don't need to set the interpreter as the first line. If that is something else than the bash, for example, it's Python or Go or whatever, you name it, then obviously you need to do the shebang and then something like bin Python. So mine is bash, so it's totally fine. Now, this is a very important switch right here. So that encodes the scripts in base 64. And I pretty much would say you'd like to do that. Because if you have some special characters or something that's supposed to be escaped and so on and so forth, it's better to just encode it in base 64 and don't bother about that. Otherwise, you may get your template either in the wrong state, or you may not even be able to save the template because it has some special characters. So I would really suggest you to encode script in base 64. Now, the user inputs based on depends on your appliance or your template that you're building. You may want your users, when they deploy VM, to put some specific inputs, like let's say the database IP or FQDN, the database username, the database password, and that kind of stuff. So you can prompt your users to enter the password or user or whatever you wish. Now, you can set this as the mandatory or as an optional. So again, depends on your use case. You may want to do that or may not want to do that. So totally, again, up to you how to set this up. If you would think that this is it, well, it's not. So what else we have? We have the context custom variables. So all that actually is possible because we are running a specific tool set called the contextualization package. And that contextualization package is very, very important part of the OpenNebula because that helps to configure networking. So the IP address that's going to be assigned by the virtual network is going to be configured on that virtual machine, right? So the next thing, what you also can do, you can configure some specific variables, and then these variables are going to be automatically configured on your new virtual machine. It might be a time zone, it might be something like password of the root user, it might be the username itself, it might be the I don't know, it might be the host name, so that also possible. So all that can be configured using the virtual uh, using the virtual using the contextualization custom variables. So I'd say it's a very nice thing to have. And for example, the password, the one that's pre-configured, is the one that we can use. So I don't know what's configured there. And as you can see, it's, well, not readable. And if you convert it from base64 to something else, then most likely, again, it's not going to be readable. So I'm going to delete this password and I'm going to set the custom one. So password, and let it be OpenNebula. Now, if you'd like to know more, then I would really encourage you to look in the documentation, right? So that is going to tell you what kind of attributes are available. Again, please note that some of these we are using themselves, and also check what is available on Windows, what is available on Linux. So again, some RTFM is a good thing to do before you start to play with it. But in general, yeah, check out the documentation for more. But again, I'm going to proceed with simple password in that case. So you can configure much more. You can configure some automatic scheduled actions. You can configure placement to pick the so to deploy your VM to a specific cluster or to a specific hosts that correspond to specific specific patterns, and so on and so forth. Okay, virtual machine template saved. So now we need to deploy the virtual machine. So the cool thing about the virtual machine, once it's deployed, you can access it. By default, you can access it using the VNC. So if you don't have secure shell configured, you still can access it and run some commands. You can back them up. So you can back up your virtual machines, or you can turn them into an image. So let's say you've installed some software and you would like to reuse this image in the future. So you can actually store this image. Now, what is important about this? Please note that different image functionality, or the backing up functionality and restore, is dependent on multiple things. So first thing is the virtualization that you're running. Second thing is the storage that you have. So in some certain scenarios, with some certain combinations of the storage and the virtualization type, you may not be able to, let's say, do the live migration or live backup. Or yeah, so keep that in mind. But if we say local KVM, then it is going to work just fine. Now, let me deploy the virtual machine and let's see what we can deploy as, for example, users. So to deploy, you have two options. You can go to VM templates, or you can go to individual VMs and press plus. So now the good thing about it is that what you can do here, you can deploy a multiple same configured instances in a single shot. So I'm going to deploy 2 instead of 1. Now I can increase the memory. So let's do 512 megs, but please note that this can be kind of restricted. So the user during the deployment cannot configure the memory. So let's say if you'd like to create multiple templates with the different sizes, so you may want your users not to be able to actually change a thing here. Again, I can set the ownership. I can also set the VM name. So for example, that would be HTTPD, and then I can do IDX. So that is going to take the ID of the virtual machine in this specific deployment. So for example, now I'm going to deploy 2. So I will have the HTTPD1 and HTTPD2. So these are the small nifty shortcuts that you can use and make your names much prettier than if you go with standard. Then it's going to take the template name. And obviously it's going to append the specific ID, but it's going to have the template name. And in this case, that's Alpine Linux 3.20. So quite long, plus it has some white spaces. I'm not a big fan of white spaces, so I would rather have something like this. But again, up to you. Do the way you wish. Now, again, I can grow the storage. I can change the network if I want to. But as you can see, for example, contextualization is not available here. So I cannot change the, say, uh, some specific parameters. Okay, clicking finish, it is going to put these virtual machines in the queue, and um, my OpenNebula scheduler is going to deploy these virtual machines. So you can observe it like that in the web UI, but if you have access to the command line, what you can also do is to type 1VM top. So 1VM top is basically going to show you the state of your virtual machines and is going to refresh it from time to time. So otherwise you would type something like watch 1VM list, but yeah, 1VM top is a built-in and it's much better because it highlights the state of the virtual machine with a specific color. So the two virtual machines are running. So the VMs are running, but the processes on the virtual machine might still be there. So I can go to the VNC, click the VNC, and check what is the current state. So as you can see, the VM is currently booting, right? So we see that the networking is in the process of starting and the contextualization package is also doing the job. As soon as I see the login prompt, I can type the root and OpenNebula as the chosen password. And as you can see, I'm inside of the console, so I can write something like PS aux and get the output of the PS. Now, let's do grep HTTPD to see if HTTPD is running. And yes, HTTPD is running, which means that I can actually do something like curl or wget to that IP address. So let's do that. Let's stop the VM. Let's do curl. I obviously need to copy the IP address, right? So paste the IP address. And as we can see, that is the basic plug for the HTTPD on the Alpine Linux if nothing is configured. So it tells us that it works, right? So again, I'm running QEMU right here, so it's not a KVM. And that's why some live migrations, some live backupping may not be available with this emulator. But if that would be a KVM, so if that would be like a bare metal instance, then that would be a no problem to me to conduct some of the backing up. Now, but before we kind of wrap the session up and go with the questions, so please note that you have snapshot and you have storage. Now, if you take a snapshot as the storage, then it's going to take a snapshot only of a specific disk. While if you go to snapshots and take a snapshot, then it's going to take a snapshot of the whole virtual machine, including the memory. So two different things in two different places serving the different purpose. So keep that in mind when you are going to write your OpenNebula cloud. And destroying your virtual machines, you go there and just do terminate hard, and it is going to terminate your VMs in a hard way. But you can do some other things, right? So you can suspend, you can stop, you can reboot, and so on and so forth. So again, if you need to, then feel free to use all these quirks, bells and whistles that the interface provides you. Alternatively, I would suggest you to master the one command line. So there are multitude of things like one VM, one template. That is going to just make your life a little bit easier. You have practically the same functionality, but to some extent slightly faster than going through the web UI. So yeah, pick the one you wish and enjoy your OpenNebula instance. So that would be it from the demonstration side. Let me have a look at your questions. So, um, can the network be managed cluster-wise, or is the configuration done per node? That comes from George. So, yeah, it's a good question, as already mentioned in the chat. So, what you actually, uh, so let's go back a little bit to the networking and clusters. So, whenever I'm configuring my virtual network, as you saw, I need to point to the physical device, yes, but I also need to select the cluster, right? So, this virtual network will be attached to a cluster. And here is the proof. If we go to VNets, you can find all virtual networks in the cluster. So basically, that is cluster wise, because the idea of a cluster is that it's more or less the kind of homogeneous resources, right? So they all have more or less the same capabilities, more or less the same CPU, so you can do the migrations within the cluster. So yeah, your virtual network is per cluster and not exactly per node. But it actually means that, for example, the node A and node B both have the same network capabilities. I hope I've answered your question. So if you have any more questions and you are not willing to ask them right now, or you don't find that it's the scope of this webinar for this type of a question, then feel free to use our community page like forum.opennebula.io. So that's where you can kind of look for the answer. Maybe it's already answered and your problem was already solved, so you just find a solution. Or you may ask your questions in the forum and let the community help you. Um, so what else is we have the bi-monthly public trainings available. So you can sign up for either the certified practitioner, either certified administrator, or certified expert, where we are covering multiple topics, hands-on labs, and much more. So feel free also to sign up to our bi-monthly courses, and I'll be really happy to see you there. So we have another question. Can we see a cluster configuration, live migration, and failover? So what I cannot do right now is live migration because I'm running QEMU instead of KVM. So that's why I cannot actually showcase that. But yeah, you just go there and do migrate live, and then you select a host. So as you can see, I'm running only one single host, so there is nowhere to migrate, right? So that is something that I cannot demo right now, but that's basically you have second or third or fourth host, and then you just migrate your virtual machine to that. But again, please note QEMU live migration is not possible. It is possible with KVM, but not with QEMU. So that is again something just to keep in mind. Now, cluster configuration, yes, sure, we can go here, and that's basically your cluster configuration. So cluster configuration consists of hosts, consists of virtual networks, and data stores. So when it comes to host, your host can be a member of only one single cluster at the same time, but your virtual networks um, and your storages can be members of multiple clusters. So that is the only limitation. But there is not that much of configure, because what you actually can do, you are going to create VDCs, so virtual data centers, that is going to kind of absorb those clusters, and then you will be able to configure different permissions based on the virtual data centers. So, when it comes to Windows VMs are supported. You'll need to check the documentation, what is actually supported, but we do have the contextualization for Windows, so you can run your post deployment configuration. So again, check out the documentation for specific variables that you can assign, because some of them are available only on Linux, some of these are available only on Windows. um, but yeah, we do support Windows VMs. Currently, Windows VMs are not in the public marketplace, so you will need to create the images yourself, and of course, that's going to you will need to supply the license to use that VM from Microsoft. But yeah, Windows VMs are supported, and we're working to bring even more and better functionality when it comes to Windows VMs. So the better support for various Windows quirks. So with the newer version, you are going to get better Windows support at some point. So yeah, stay tuned for the news and for the newer versions. Again, hope I've answered the question uh, the way you've expected that. What else we have? We are running a multitude of webinars. So the webinars may be about the migration from, let's say, VMware to OpenNebula. They may be about something like using the public cloud and private and building private cloud with OpenNebula. And also there are also webinars by the Truly Yours. So something like one KE deployment, aka the OpenNebula Kubernetes engine, how to deploy it, how to run it, what are the fine tunings available. Or, for example, something like the multi tenancy with OpenNebula is also scheduled. So feel free to visit our webinars page and sign up for more webinars, either from myself or from my awesome colleagues. Don't forget about the forum, of course, and don't forget to stay tuned. Yes, the LXC is also supported. Again, just not in the scope of this webinar, but it is supported, and you can configure that. So, for example, when you are adding your host, you can set it to have the Linux containers instead of QEMU or instead of KVM. Right? Any other questions? No, no. I mean, the host itself is like a dedicated host for some specific virtualization type, right? So, uh, I mean, you can have multiple hosts with with like the LXC or KVM or QEMU, and that all kind of can reside in different clusters. But initially, the idea is that your host, if the host is KVM, then the host is KVM. All right. So thank you all for attending. I hope you've learned something new. Again, don't forget about the forum, don't forget about webinars, and don't forget to sign up for training. So thanks for attending, and see you in the next session.